10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
Sarah, thank you for joining me on GB Talks.
Thank you for having me, Harley.
They can hear the nervousness in your voice.
And I'm probably going to fiddle with these little things on the bench.
Nobody's played me in a game of chess.
I don't know how to play, so it won't be me.
Yeah. Do you know how the pieces move?
No,
No, well, we're definitely playing the game then.
definitely not.
How's your morning been?
Good. I have my son homesick from school,
Yeah.
but otherwise,
What's got cold?
yeah.
Do you think we're going to go into lockdown again?
Maybe. I think so. I think today would be the breaker, depending on the numbers.
They've got an announcement today at 6.
Oh, tonight?
Yeah.
Do they?
Yeah.
Okay, so possibly.
Yeah. All right. Let's get straight into it. Who are the locals listening to?
So, my name's Sarah. I'm been in Shepparton my entire life. All my family's here. We have a local business in Mooroopna. I work part-time with a wonderful group of women, and I'm a mum to 3, I'll say spectacular most of the time, children. A 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 19-year-old.
Yeah, wow. I'm sure I've told you this before, but you're a big reason on why I started the podcast.
Yeah, no, I think that's crazy. I don't get it, but...
Well, Sarah's one of my clients at the gym, and I'd known her for a little while, and I kind of had this vision of who she was in my head. And one day we're sitting on the chest press, and she's doing her sets, and I don't know exactly how it came up, but she tells me that she has this daughter who's 18 or was turning 18, and Sarah's young, right? And I was like, wait a second, what's going on here? And then she just unravels this whole story about how she got pregnant young and the journey that she went on through that. And I was sitting there like completely amazed at this story because, like I said, it wasn't who I thought she was. And also when I heard the story, it's not how I thought it was going to turn out. It was like what you would hope for in a story like this, but you wouldn't expect it to play out that way.
It's funny, I was actually talking to someone this morning about this, and she said to me, the first time you were telling me about your story, it was actually in a nail appointment, and she said to me, when you were saying it, I didn't want to finish doing your nails because I didn't want you to leave. She said, I was really drawn in, and I said, why though? I don't understand what made you feel like that. And she said to me, you're just not what I expected a teenage mum to be. I'm like, oh. So, and I suppose, yeah, stereotypes develop from something, and even growing up, I wasn't a stereotype of a teenage mum at school. I attended school regularly, I had really good grades, I come from a really good family, so it was a big shock to everyone when I fell pregnant when I was 15.
Wow. And were you 15 when you gave birth or 16?
15.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, like, was Trent your boyfriend at the time?
Yeah, so we were together only for a short time. We were kids, basically. I say teenagers, but yeah, we were kids. We were together for only a short time and then broke up and both went our separate ways. So when I found out I was pregnant, we weren't together at that time, and I was actually 30 weeks when I found out. So I found out by my mum had asked me whether there was something wrong because she'd felt my stomach when I was asleep, and she said to me, something's wrong with, like, it feels you've got to be pregnant or something's gone wrong. And I said, no, don't be silly. And I went to school that day, and we were in a sex education class, I suppose you'd call it, at the time. And the teacher was drawing like fallopian tubes up on the board and saying, this is how you get pregnant. And I was sitting next to my best friend, who's still my best friend, and she sat there and she just looked at me and she said, that could be you. And I was like, sort of laughed it off, and I'm like, no, don't be silly. And then when the bell went, it was that lunchtime that I decided that whatever was happening in my body at that point wasn't going to go away on its own. So I rang my mum and I said that you have to come get me from school. She came to get me And I actually didn't even tell her. I didn't say, hey, I think I'm pregnant or anything. I think she just knew. She just picked me up from school and I started crying, and she didn't even really say much more. She called around and tried to find a doctor for me to get into. So we went to the doctor that night, and I laid up on the table and the doctor sort of touched my stomach and she goes, oh yeah, yep, you're about 29, 30 weeks. And I was, being 15, I was so young, I didn't really register what that meant. And my mum started crying, and at that point in time I still looked at mum and I was like, don't cry, it's okay, like I'll go to Melbourne and I'll have an abortion and don't worry, it'll be fine, we'll work it out. And I remember her looking at me and she just said to me, you don't understand. She's like, you have to have this baby, you don't have a choice anymore, that's how far along you are. And I got up and just left the room, and mum spoke to the doctor for a bit. We got out into the car and they gave me pamphlets on adoption, so like going to Melbourne and having the baby and adopting it out. And sorry, in that moment I was like, yep, that's what I'll do. I'll go to Melbourne, I'll adopt it out, I'll come back here, go back to school, no one will know that I've been missing. And it wasn't until my grandmother came to visit and she basically said to me, if you're going to adopt it out, I'll adopt it. And from that moment we didn't talk about it again. It was just, that's what it was. So I only had a very, very short pregnancy, so I was 10 weeks of trying to come to terms with what was going on. I ended up leaving school straight away, and I finished via correspondence. So I signed up with a school and finished that year by correspondence. I was in year 10 at the time, and then my mum basically was my biggest support with everything, with school, with being at home. But the funniest part was that my parents and my husband's parents were friends. So I am the only girl in my family. Of my siblings, there's me and my 3 brothers, and I'm also the oldest. So my dad, needing someone to talk to about the fact that his young teenage daughter was pregnant, went to speak to his friends, and his friends that he spoke to were Trent's mum. And at the time, she didn't know that it was Trent. She didn't even think about it until she later on had a shower, and she said, she laughs about it now, she said she was washing her hair and she counted back the dates on the calendar and she was like, oh my gosh, and worked out how it all played out.
Yeah.
So she brought him over, and when she was born, he met her and basically started seeing each other from that again for a short time. And so I spent a lot of time, I suppose, in the lead up to working out how my life was going to look or what it was going to look like. But yeah, once she was here, obviously we didn't think twice about it. So,
what was it like when his parents brought him over? Like, he wouldn't have known what to say. Or... He
didn't. He was very young, I suppose. And in the big picture, when you look at things, I left school from that date and didn't go back until the following year. He had to continue going to school, so he probably copped a lot more from teenage kids, because teenage kids can be cruel. He copped a lot more from others, so he didn't really have a lot to say. He still kept his distance. We didn't really see each other for those 10 weeks until after she was born. Whereas I feel like I didn't probably have to face that as much as he did. When I went back to school, I started back at school the following year, so I went back and completed BCE, so year 11 and 12.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd had that gap in between to sort of come to terms with everything. So.
What symptoms do you have? I don't know if that's the right word, but what symptoms do you have when you're 30 weeks pregnant? Surely you're showing.
So we talk about this so much, and I've had 2 children since then, and I've both times been like, I don't know how I didn't know. I don't understand how I didn't know. But the power of the mind is incredible. And was in such denial at that age. I just thought, I just kept thinking, if I don't think about it or I don't talk about it or don't face it, it'll go away. Like it sounds so silly to say it out loud, but that is how I felt at the time. When I look back on it, there were times when I remember sleeping on the carpet, on the floor, and feeling the lump in my stomach and feeling like if I just lay here on this hard floor, it will go away. And I remember getting my belly button pierced and I had to sign a form to say, you're not pregnant.
Yeah.
And I remember it crossing my mind and thinking, oh, maybe I could be. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I didn't know or didn't face it. But yeah, I just really was in a different state of mind.
Because of your personal experience, do you feel like sex ed should have been sooner at school, or?
Yes, absolutely. Because obviously when they were talking about it, it was far too late, and not just for me, but for everybody else in that classroom.
Yeah.
Year 10 was far too late. I do believe they do it earlier now, but back then that was what you got. And in saying that, I did everything safe too. So sometimes I just think things are meant to be. They're beyond your control. I often say that she was a blessing in so many ways. My mum was going through a really rough patch at that point in time, and she was like a saviour for my mum, having this beautiful baby to focus on. Also, while I was pregnant, because I didn't know, I was snow skiing, horse riding, doing everything you're not supposed to do when you're pregnant. I did that.
Yeah.
I was a teenager. I didn't think about anything else. So I feel like she defied the odds in getting here.
Yeah.
So.
Is there any risk to having a baby so young? Because like at 15, you're still developing.
Yeah, and I think that, I suppose at the time I didn't really think about it that much. Like I didn't think about the fact that I was still a child. I had a massive support system in my mum. She was there every step of the way. We were extremely close, and I don't know how I would have coped without her. But I suppose when you're young, you're so naive too that you don't realise, like I think about all the times that new mums say about bringing home a baby and they're like, oh, I don't know what to do with it, or I don't know how to deal with this. I didn't even think about any of that stuff because I was actually too young to even comprehend the risks that were involved or the things that could happen, or I was so naive, and I didn't realise how naive I was until I'm older.
Yeah, but like you said, you were a kid yourself.
Yeah.
Like it would have been so tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did with your dad, was he harsh initially and then come around? Because that's how I feel like, I think I'll get quite emotional when I heard it initially, and then I'd be like, okay.
So my dad, I was supposed to be going to his house for dinner the night that I found out, and my mum, she's quite blunt in when she speaks, and Dad said, oh, what's wrong with Sarah? And Mum just turned around and said, oh, she's actually 29 weeks pregnant. So my poor dad, like, it was over the phone, thank goodness. And I remember getting on the phone to him and he like screamed and sort of like, he goes, how, I won't swear, but how did that happen? And I didn't even know how to answer him. I was like, well, how do you think it happened? And he was like, he didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
He didn't know what to say. And to be honest, we probably didn't really talk a lot about it for a long time because he needed time to come to terms with it.
Yeah.
When he did, and when he met her, and he met her from the minute she was born and loved her and everything was fine, but yeah, it definitely was hard for him to swallow. And it would be, like, I don't blame him at all. I think now, I still say to Georgia's 19 now, and I still say to her, like, don't do that to me, because I couldn't cope. And my mum, her reaction, she was everything that you'd want a mother to be, but everything I don't think I would be. Like, I don't think I could react like she did. She was so calm, she never asked any questions, she was just 100% supportive.
Yeah.
So.
It's very good.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the name? Did you get to pick it?
I did. I actually don't really remember. I remember having 2 names to pick from, but I think they were all out of books and stuff like that. I didn't really have a lot of thought into it.
Yeah.
So.
How did your and Trent's relationship go from that point?
So when he started obviously coming to see her, and then I think she was maybe 3 months old when we started dating, and we were together quite a lot. Our relationship was still very teenage, I suppose you would call it. I don't know that it's good or bad. It was just one of those teenage relationships. It wasn't healthy. It was just a teenage relationship. But there was a child involved. So it was, I suppose, a completely different aspect on our relationship. So we were together for, I don't know, maybe 3. I don't really have a timeline on everything, which sounds odd. Like people say, oh, how long have you been together? When did this happen? I don't really know. I just know that we were together for about 3 years, and then we went our separate ways when I think I was about 19 or 20 when we went our separate ways. We had 3 or 4 years apart. So he moved towns and I moved towns for a little while. We did a lot of growing up and living, I suppose. I suppose, especially I feel like for a guy, those teenage years are really important to grow, and especially turning into a young adult.
Yes.
So we went our own ways and did that, and then we basically started seeing each other when we both moved back to Shepparton, and he started visiting Georgia again regularly and seeing her, and we developed a new kind of friendship, I suppose, to start with. And then, the rest is history.
Why did you move away from Shep? Do you feel like it was a part of the stigma that was around that experience that you had, or was there another reason?
No, there was a few reasons. So first of all, at that point in time, my mum moved away, so she lived in Warrnambool.
Yeah, okay.
And so when Trent and I separated when we were younger, I probably needed to get away from that whole relationship and whatever was happening in my life at the time. So I ended up following her to live in Warrnambool for a couple of years.
Could you imagine not having your mum as that support system? Do you think as a young parent that you could raise a kid without having someone to fall back on? I notice a lot of people move back to their hometowns when they have kids because they need their parents to kind of show them the ropes.
My parents and Trent's parents are currently both travelling Australia, so we're without parents here right now, and it is tough. There are times where I go, I think that for young, especially for teenage mums, I think it's really important to have a support system, and I think that the sad reality is that not many do. Not many teenage mums do have that really strong support system behind them, but I've since learnt that there's a lot of services and places that can help teenage mums if they need it. I guess I never really felt the need to go and use any of the services available, but my mum,
Like mums groups and stuff like that, is that what you mean, or more
there's
specific things?
Pregnancy support services.
Yeah.
That have all sorts of help available, from things that they might need for the baby or whatever. Including counselling services and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Did your mum move back to Shepparton?
Yes.
She's here now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she moved back to here. Well, we moved back at the same time. So she basically was working there, got a job opportunity back here, and then, came back. My youngest brother was living with her at the time in Warrnambool, and he was hitting that stage in life where he was, developing good friends and seeing where his future lied, and he wanted to come home, so she came home basically for him.
Yeah, okay. Does Georgia have a special connection with her grandmother?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Her and my mum were really, really close, and I suppose it was like a second mum to her growing up. I still did. You think about those early days of bringing a baby home and the sleepless nights and things like that. My mum had a lot of sleepless nights too, so she would get up and help me in the middle of the night just so that I could rest. So definitely that bond was there from the very early days.
If Georgia was in trouble, would she call you or her grandmother?
I would like to think that she would still call me, depending on what it was.
Yeah.
She's pretty good at analysing what the answer would be. So if she needed something that she knew she wasn't going to get from me, she would definitely go to my mum.
How do you think Georgia feels about her upbringing?
It's funny, she doesn't really think a lot of it. I mean, obviously, when she started going to school and the kids would start talking about their parents, a lot of her parents, her friends' parents would be 35 or something when she was in early primary school, and she was like, wow, she goes like, my mum's not even 20. So I think that that was sort of when she first started to realise that it was a little bit out of the ordinary. It's now she loves telling the story. So she's at uni at the moment. She said to me that the group of women that she's met at uni are similar age to me, and a couple of them have said to her, oh, I know your brother, and she's like, no, my brother's 10, and they're like, oh, no, your other brother, and she goes, I don't have another brother, and she goes, oh, you'll be talking about my dad.
Yeah.
Because people see us and go, oh my gosh, you're way too young to have children of your own or at that age.
Not only that, you used to look young as well.
Well, I don't know, I feel like that's a lot of people. I love seeing people's facial expressions when I say to them that my daughter's 19 or she's turning 20 this year, so that's, and people are like, what? Like, it's really weird. Or I'll say she's now got a boyfriend, and I say, oh yeah, Georgia and her boyfriend, and they'll go, yeah, your daughter, like, what age are your kids? And their facial expressions are on the verge of shock, but they're inquisitive. They want to know more about the story or more about how that works, because the dynamics, the numbers that people do in their heads don't add up. So they quickly sit there and go, oh, hang on.
Do you enjoy telling the story?
Yes, I suppose I didn't realise. I still at times go, I don't think there's a story to tell. It's just the hand that I was dealt, or the way things panned out in my life. But then parts of it I go, oh, people seem to be interested. Why? And then I start sort of thinking about it and go, well, it's not. Because if I saw a 15-year-old pregnant now, I would be like, whoa. You can't help. I think it's just human nature that people are going to judge to a certain level.
Yeah.
And you'd be lying if you said you didn't. And even after being in that situation, I would still judge. I would still sit there and be like, wow, that's going to be a hard road, or that's going to be, But the fact is that most of our 15-year-olds out there are doing that and don't risk or don't see the risks that are involved.
What do you reckon the trajectory of your life would have been like if this hadn't happened? Do you think you obviously wouldn't be who you are right now?
I don't know. I really don't know. And I often think about this, and like my husband, like Trent and I talk and say, what do you think we would be doing do you think that we would have ended up back together? And he says yes, because he's just like, yeah, for sure. I'm like, I don't know about that. But I went back to school and did year 11 and 12, and I went and did tours of universities in year 12, because in year 12 I still was like, yeah, I'm going to go to uni and I'm going to live on campus with a baby. Like, that's how, like, in my head.
Can you even do that? I hope so.
They took me and they were saying that, like, I remember them showing me, they were saying that you basically can't live on campus, but there is this type of accommodation available. So there was opportunities there, and I remember thinking, yeah, like, I'm going to come here and I'm going to go to class with this baby and this is how it's all going to play out. Obviously it didn't happen because I didn't go, but I think that...
What did you want to study?
Actually, I applied to do nursing.
Okay.
And I deferred my offer twice, and then I didn't go back. Because I'm a big believer that we make decisions, the best decisions that we think suit us at the time, whether them decisions would change throughout your life. And I don't necessarily think they're regrets, and I wouldn't change them, but there are choices now that I probably make different to what I would have back then. Back then, that timing wasn't right for me to do it, so I deferred it. So I don't know. I never, as a kid, like, girls talk about growing up and having families and getting married and doing all this. I never saw myself as that person. I was always going to be the person that lived in the city and wore high heels and went into an office to work. That was what I wanted. Whereas now I hate the city and I hate high heels. so I think that, I'm not sure where I would have been if it didn't happen. But I think that I believe that our life's half pre-planned before we do it. So I just enjoy the ride.
Yeah. Like you mentioned before, if you've seen a 15-year-old pregnant at the moment, you'd kind of play out a movie in your head that probably isn't the best, but you would also have another movie playing where it would play out how I think yours has turned out.
I don't know. I see, and that's what I mean. So you would think that I would have to see things that way. Like, you would think that I would go, oh yeah, my life's played out like this, so perhaps this is a situation. But there's lots of movies out there about teenage pregnancies, and I think there's a show now, isn't there, called Teen Mums or something?
Yeah.
And that paints a picture of the stereotype of what young mums are. And I think that I never felt like I was sort of like that or part of that. And that's what I mean, my grades and stuff were at school. I had a really good bond with my teachers. And so for me, going back to school was never a question because I wanted to succeed. I wanted to defy the odds. So the odds were that I wasn't going to go back to school and I was going to be this stay-at-home teen mum. I never wanted that, and I always was like, right, I'm definitely not being that because that's what people expect. And although that's probably not the best motivation for anything in life, that's usually how I work, is that I'm motivated when people say you can't do something, then I want to do it more.
Yeah. People would have expected you to settle.
Yes. And I still remember lining up in the line at Centrelink because I had to submit forms and everything, and I still remember being in that line and saying to my mum, there were a couple of people in front of me and they were swearing and, cursing and saying that they couldn't wait to get their paycheck because they wanted to spend their money on the weekend and drinking and all this sort of stuff. And I remember looking at my mum and saying like that, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be like that. And she just looked at me and she goes, we all have a choice.
Yeah.
And so from then I was like, right, well, I definitely don't want that life. So...
Yeah. So, was it hard to let Trent back into your life, or easier because you had that thing that connected you two already?
No, it was probably like at the start when she was a newborn. It sounds bad, but it was almost like a novelty. This baby was like a novelty, so it was a novelty to my friends and his friends, and everyone wanted to see her and meet her, and I don't think anybody really understood what being around forever meant, including Trent and I. So at the start, I honestly believe that we probably tried to make things work because there was this baby involved, which is why it didn't work in the start. And we went our separate ways. And I didn't like the person he was back then, and I didn't like the person I was back then either. So when we separated and moved away, although at the time I probably felt hurt and upset and everything by it, I now think it's the best thing ever. Because when we reconnected as grown-ups and as two different people who had grown and learnt, and I still say like I fell in love with this completely different person who, I'm very, very lucky to have now. So... Yeah.
Well, I don't know Trent well, but every time I talk to him, he seems like you just get good vibes off him. Do you know what I mean? Like he seems like a great person, like yourself. Yeah,
and he's a great dad, and there's a lot that if you was to speak to him, he often says that he regrets a lot of things because he missed out on a lot of George's childhood, and he gets really down on himself about that. But for me, I just think that was such a time of growth for him I think without it he wouldn't be the dad he is now.
Yeah.
So
I think you hit the nail on the head.
yeah.
I think those years are important for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Did you have to negotiate having 2 more kids, or were they planned, or can you go into that?
they were I think they were planned, I think. I don't really remember, is that bad? No, they were definitely planned. We were not married when we had our son, so the middle child. But he was planned, and it was a very different experience. It almost felt like a first baby all over again. Just being pregnant, like feeling what pregnancy was like, because I didn't really get that the first time. And having Trent there the whole way through, and it was just very, very different. And to see the excitement that Georgia had to finally have this sibling, because all her friends at school and everything had brothers or sisters, or, and she missed that and probably thought she was never going to get it because of the age thing. So yeah, that was really good. And then the last child was sort of half planned. We talked about it, weren't sure, but she's here.
Yeah. How do you guys keep the romance alive?
Time out, I suppose. We make sure that we do date nights and time by ourselves. But for me, I think the biggest thing about even connection in general is humour. We laugh a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. About silly things too, things that are probably not funny to others. But he gets my humour and I get his humour, and yeah, we laugh a lot, which is, keeps you feeling young so you don't feel old.
Yeah.
Especially when you've been, like, I often say, I've been a mum for a really long time. Like, I've been a mum and I've still got a long time left. Like, I've still got ages.
It would feel like you've been a mum 2 separate times.
It kind of does.
Because, like usually George is out of the house, you've got your freedom again. But
I don't have that.
You don't have that yet.
I know. Feels like a really long time left. We often joke about that we're going to go, like, on a cruise or on a massive holiday when they all leave, because by the time the youngest one leaves, we're going to be, like, parents for, like, 40 years. So it's going to be a really long time.
Yeah. Well, it just seems like you're always doing stuff together, and it's just, I love it. I love, like, because a lot of people who have partners and are married, and they just, their whole lives just revolve around the kids. Like, I was talking to somebody just a few days ago, and I was like, oh, do you guys plan romance in your life? And they're like, oh, no, we don't. And now when we're alone together, we kind of don't know what to talk about, because, like, obviously the whole role of being a mother and a father can take over. That's taken over, and that's the connection now, and they forgot what the original connection was.
Lots of people say that, and a lot of my friends who are parents for the first time just in the last 5 or 6 years, because they're only just starting to have kids, are like, oh my gosh, like, how did you do this? Or why didn't you tell us this? Or why, I didn't realise our relationship would change so much, and all these sort of things. And I suppose when it's happening, you don't think about it, but to look back on, that's probably something that I'm really proud of, is the relationship that we still have after this huge past, both good and bad times in there. We have this really great relationship together. And yeah, I think that people forget that you have to sometimes work at that, especially once children are involved.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you have any joint goals moving forward? I feel like you guys would be, like, talking about this sort of stuff, because, do you know what I mean? Like, you're on that sort of level where you're not scared to elevate the conversation and talk about, like, what excites you about the future and this and that. And
I love asking hard questions.
Yeah.
Even to Trent, like, often we'll sit there and I'll just be randomly saying to him something like, if you had $20 million in the bank, what would you do right now? Like, just silly questions like that. And his answers and my answers change all the time.
Good.
So when it comes to goals, I'm not a goal setter. He is like he wants a 5-year plan. And I'm like, nah, let's just have a 5-week plan.
Yeah.
Because I'm, I just don't like looking too far into the future, and I don't have a lot of patience to wait for things. So I long-term goals, we both have the same goal of just having a happy, healthy life for as long as possible with us and the kids in it. That's our ultimate goal. Trent's always probably had a dream of living near the ocean, which would be lovely in theory, but I'm a bit of a mummy's girl and I'm a sook and I don't want to leave my mum.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we'd ever do it, and I don't know that we'd do it to the kids, to move the kids away. But who knows? We've still got a lot of living left, so maybe one day.
Do you think you have another kid?
I nearly swore then. No.
But could you imagine?
Clear cut, no. I think that I would, I don't know how I would cope. I feel like I would have coped better when I was 15 than I would now.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, that's a lot.
You've left some gems in this conversation, but could you give some advice to people who are young mums? Or people in like a similar situation to what you were in?
I feel like this is such a hard question. Despite like the services that I mentioned earlier, for people that really need that don't have that backing, but not just being a young mum, but lots of people have said to me, oh, you've gone through trauma. And I go, oh, I don't look at it as trauma. And they're like, well, that's a traumatic event that has helped shape your life. But for me, I just think that even when bad times come, holding on and knowing that good times are going to come after it, eventually all things pass, good, bad, or otherwise, nothing stays with us forever. So just holding on and knowing that even in the bad times it will get better. Yeah. I think that's the most important thing, because in the darkest of moments you think that that's the end and oh my God, how am I going to cope and what's my life going to look like, and it always gets better. Yeah. Always.
That's great advice. I didn't give you this question on the question list, but everyone cops it. Who locally inspires you?
There's lots of people that inspire me, and for different reasons. Like my mum inspires me I want to be the kind of mum that she was. I'm far from it, but I want to be. But I'm inspired by, I have a good friend, Rachel, who is also actually my boss, but she inspires me. She's just she's had a lot go on in her life, but she's very, very driven to be better. No matter how bad she's been, she wants to be better.
Yeah.
And no matter how good she's been, she wants to be better. And I'm also very inspired by, I have a friend that I used to work with, who I don't work with anymore, Tina, and she inspired me she's always like positive, like not always, but she always tries to see the best in people. And I think that that's really, really important in a world that we live in at the moment.
Yeah, it's a gift.
Yeah.
Awesome. I really enjoyed that. Do you have anything else to say?
I don't think so. Thank you for having me. I'm glad that it's over.
Did it get easier?
Yep.
I told you. Thanks, Sarah.
Very good. Thanks. Bye.